The door slammed shut behind me. My bags were already sitting on the curb. The sky was gray, heavy with rain, and the street was silent, almost like it was holding its breath. I stood there for a moment, not believing what had just happened. In all my years in this country, through every storm, every struggle, I never imagined I would be thrown out of my own son's home. But there I was, 68 years old, wet hair sticking to my face, a lifetime of sacrifice packed into 2 suitcases, and the only thing echoing in my head was that whisper I heard in the hallway, a whisper that shattered everything. She leaned in close to him, her voice so low I could barely make it out, but I did. I'll never forget it. She said, "She's trying to control you. She always has." That was it, just that. Nothing loud, nothing angry, just a few words, poisonous ones. And my son, he believed her, just like that. A look passed between them like a secret deal had been struck. He didn't ask me if it was true. He didn't ask me anything at all. His eyes changed. They were empty, like I was no longer his mother but some stranger who overstayed her welcome. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just stood there in the rain, watching the front door, the one I walked through 1,000 times to help him with groceries, to bring him soup when he was sick, to watch his children when he and his wife wanted a date night, now slammed in my face like I never mattered. I raised this boy alone. I came to this country with nothing but a toddler in my arms and a dream that he could have something better. I worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, ate the scraps so he could eat fresh. Every dollar I made went to his school shoes, his dentist visits, his birthday parties. And now, I was standing in the street like I was trash. Like the life I gave up for him was just some favor he could now return by turning his back on me. There's a pain you can't explain to anyone unless they've lived it. The pain of being erased. Not by a stranger, not by time, not by life itself, but by your own blood. By the person whose first breath you witnessed, whose scraped knees you kissed, whose nightmares you calmed. My hands shook as I tried to pick up my suitcase. It wasn't heavy, not really, but in that moment, it felt like it carried every memory, every moment, every meal I skipped so he wouldn't have to. A neighbor walked by and looked at me, then looked away quickly. No one wants to see shame in public. It makes people uncomfortable. I could feel my throat closing, not from the cold, not from the rain, but from something deeper, betrayal. My stomach twisted. I didn't even know where to go. No money, no plan. Just the clothes on my back and a bank account that had been drained dry helping my son start his business. The same business where I once cleaned the windows every Sunday morning, proud that my boy had made it. Now I wasn't even allowed to sit on his couch. I kept hearing the sound of her whisper. So gentle, so sweet. That's what hurt the most. Not the volume, but the intent. She didn't scream at me. She didn't throw things. She didn't call me names. She simply said a few words in his ear and watched everything collapse. That's how manipulation works. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silk gloves and venom on the tongue. And my son? He let it happen. He let her plant the seed. He let it grow. Maybe part of him even wanted an excuse. Maybe I was too close, too familiar, too honest. I had warned him about her before. I had seen how she watched him when he spoke to me, how her smile tightened when I laughed with the grandkids. She wanted full control, and she got it. The thing is, when your own child rejects you, it cuts in a place you didn't even know existed. It's not just pain. It's unbelonging. It's the feeling that you don't have a place on this earth anymore. Because if the person you created, if the flesh of your flesh, decides you are disposable, what does that make you? A ghost with a heartbeat? I walked slowly, unsure of where my feet were even taking me. Each step felt heavier than the last. I passed by a park where I once pushed Mateo on the swing. I remembered his little laugh, how he begged for one more push. He used to call me his best friend. He used to kiss my cheek for no reason. That boy is gone. Or maybe I never knew him at all. I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt replaced in someone's heart? Have you ever watched someone you love choose a lie over your loyalty? If you have, I want you to leave a comment below. Just write, "I know this pain." Because your story matters too. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing it, we help each other survive. If this story is speaking to your heart, I invite you to subscribe. Not just to follow a channel, but to join a space where your voice is honored, your pain is seen, and your healing matters. Here, no one gets left behind. Let me tell you something I learned that night. You can survive a lot of things. You can survive poverty, hunger, racism, fear. But surviving the silence of a child who no longer sees you, that takes a different kind of strength. And I wasn't sure I had it, but I would find out soon enough. My name is Dolores Navarro. I'm 68 years old. I live in Austin, Texas, in a modest little apartment above a bakery that smells like cinnamon and burnt sugar every morning. If you saw me walking down the street, you'd probably think I'm just another older lady carrying groceries with a scarf tied over her hair. You wouldn't know the battles I've fought. You wouldn't see the years stitched into the calluses on my hands. You wouldn't feel the weight of a life spent loving too hard and being thanked too little. I came to this country with a child in my arms and a fire in my chest. Mateo was just a baby when we crossed. I still remember the way he clung to me at night, his tiny hand gripping my shirt like he knew the world was shifting beneath our feet. We didn't have much, but I had dreams, big ones. I didn't come here for myself. I came for him, to give him what I never had: safety, opportunity, a future. In Mexico, my life was already marked by hunger. I was the daughter of a shoemaker and a woman who cleaned houses but barely had shoes on her own feet. I was born into a cycle of sacrifice. My mother never knew rest. She scrubbed floors until her knees gave out. My father died young, a heart that worked too hard for too long. When I left, I wasn't just leaving my hometown. I was trying to outrun the generational curse of being invisible. Texas became my battlefield. I cleaned motel rooms by day and babysat by night. I learned English by listening to the radio and watching soap operas with subtitles. I didn't go out. I didn't make friends. My only mission was to provide for my son. Every cent I made was counted, saved, spent on Mateo. There were nights I went to bed with only water and stale bread in my stomach, but he always had milk and something warm. There's a kind of love that becomes your religion. That's what motherhood was for me. When Mateo smiled, it was like the sun broke through every cloudy day. When he took his first steps on a Texas sidewalk, I cried because I knew those steps were already further than I ever got in my own life. I kept his drawings in a shoebox. I still have them, even now. One says, "I love you, Mommy," in crooked letters with a heart too big for the page. I worked for a woman named Carol for nearly 12 years. She had a big house with marble counters and a pool she never used. I cleaned her windows while Mateo sat in the shade with his school books. She once said to me, "Dolores, you are more disciplined than anyone I know." But discipline wasn't a choice. It was the air I breathed. It was survival. I raised Mateo with manners, with kindness, with an understanding that respect wasn't optional. It was sacred. I told him never to speak with a full mouth, never to ignore someone who greets you. Always say thank you. Always say I love you when you leave a room, just in case that goodbye becomes the last. I didn't just raise a boy. I built a man, brick by brick. He grew up strong, handsome, smart. He spoke Spanish with pride and English with ease. Teachers praised him. Neighbors adored him. I lived for the sound of his success. When he graduated high school, I wore my best dress, the only one I owned that wasn't a uniform. He walked across that stage, and I remember thinking, every mop, every toilet, every sleepless night was worth it. But I also remember a moment, just a flicker. After the ceremony, when the families were hugging and taking photos, I asked for a picture with him. He smiled, but it was tight, quick. His eyes were already scanning the crowd, looking for someone else. A girl, a friend, a future beyond me. That was the first time I felt it, the beginning of the distance. I pushed it away. I told myself, he's just growing up. I reminded myself that independence was the goal. I hadn't raised him to be a prisoner of my sacrifice. I raised him to be free. But even freedom can cut, especially when it starts to erase you. As he got older, things shifted. He stopped telling me about his life. He stopped asking for advice. He moved in with Clara and called less. Visits became short. Conversations became shallow. I would ask how work was, and he'd say, "Fine." I'd ask if he needed anything, and he'd say, "We're good." Always we. As if I had been replaced with another we. There were times I tried to talk to him, to ask what was wrong. He would shrug and say I worried too much. Just relax, Mom. You don't have to take care of everything anymore. But that was the thing. Taking care was all I ever knew. I remember one afternoon I surprised them with dinner. I made his favorite, chile relleno, the way his grandmother used to make it. I knocked on the door, expecting a smile. Instead, Clara answered with a look of irritation. "You didn't call," she said flatly. Mateo came to the door, but he didn't hug me. He didn't even help me carry the food. We sat in awkward silence as they picked at the meal. No one asked for seconds. When I left, I cried the whole bus ride home. You start to see the signs. But denial is a strong drug, especially for mothers. We want to believe that no matter how distant our children become, the core remains. The love, the bond, the gratitude. We convince ourselves that they're just stressed, just busy, just distracted. But sometimes, they're just gone. They've moved on in ways that don't include you. And that truth is like a splinter in the soul. I want to ask you something, from one human to another. Have you ever poured everything you had into someone only to be left with silence? If you have, share your story in the comments. Write, "I gave everything," so others know they're not alone. Your experience matters more than you think, and someone out there is waiting to feel seen through your words. If you're still here, listening to this voice, it's because you care. Maybe because part of this story feels familiar. If that's true, I want to gently invite you to subscribe. Not just for me, but for yourself. For the community we're building here, one of empathy, strength, and survival. You are not forgotten. Sometimes I wonder if Mateo ever truly saw me. Not just the woman who ironed his clothes or made his school lunches, but the human being behind the apron. The woman who gave up love, comfort, youth, and even dreams to build him a future. Sometimes I think, maybe I loved him too much. Maybe I gave him so much of me that there was nothing left for him to miss. But the truth is, I'd do it all again, even knowing what came later, because that's what real love is. It's not a contract, it's not a debt, it's a gift, one that often goes unopened. I never thought that gift would be thrown back in my face, but it was. And not just thrown, crushed. I still remember the first winter after we arrived in Texas. Mateo was barely 3 years old, his cheeks red from the cold, bundled up in a jacket 2 sizes too big that someone had donated to us at a church near the border. We shared a room in a run-down boarding house with paper-thin walls and a heater that worked only when it wanted to. There was no crib, no toys, no warm milk before bed. Just a mattress on the floor, a thick blanket I brought from Mexico, and my arms wrapped around him like a shield. He would fall asleep to the sound of my whispers, promises I wasn't sure I could keep. I told him every night, "Someday, you're going to have your own room, your own bed. You're going to go to school and speak perfect English. You're going to have birthday parties with balloons, not candles on tortillas." I said it like a prayer, because when you have nothing, words are all you can give. Those early years were brutal. I worked anywhere they would take me. Day labor cleaning houses, washing dishes in the back of diners, folding clothes in laundry shops that smelled like bleach and sweat. I took jobs at odd hours so I could walk Mateo to preschool myself. I didn't trust strangers to care for him. He was my reason for breathing. If someone looked at him wrong, I felt it in my spine. We lived paycheck to paycheck, but I always made sure there was a small treat for him. A plastic dinosaur from the corner store. A scoop of ice cream from the gas station freezer when the week went well. I never bought anything for myself. My shoes had holes. My coat was threadbare. But Mateo always had what he needed. When kids at school mocked his lunch or his accent, he didn't tell me. He was protecting me even back then. I found out from his teacher, who said, "He never cries. He just clenches his little fists." He was strong, but he was also sweet. He once picked wildflowers from a vacant lot and handed them to me after work, saying, "For the hardest working mommy in the world." I kept them in a jar until they turned brown, then pressed them in a book I still have. By the time he was 8, I had saved enough to rent a tiny apartment with a real bedroom for him. I remember sitting on the floor of that apartment with him, eating our first dinner on a towel because we didn't have a table yet. Beans and rice again. But we laughed. He said, "This is the best house ever." And in that moment, it really was. I paid the bills by sewing on weekends. I learned to hem pants and patch denim. I became known as the lady who could fix anything with a needle. I would work late into the night, the sound of thread pulling through fabric becoming a lullaby. Mateo would fall asleep on the couch beside me, a book resting on his chest, dreams undisturbed by the clatter of my sewing machine. Every year, I made his Halloween costumes by hand. One year, he wanted to be a firefighter. I found red felt at a discount store and cut out tiny yellow stripes for his uniform. Another year, he was a pirate. I turned a pair of my black pants into pirate trousers. He was so proud, running through the apartment swinging a toy sword, shouting, "Arg!" like he had seen on TV. The neighbors said they'd never seen a kid smile so much. We didn't have much, but I gave him a childhood he could remember with warmth. I volunteered at his school when I could, made snacks for his class, helped him with homework even when my eyes burned from fatigue. I didn't finish school myself, but I made sure he did. He was always good with numbers, always quick to learn. His teachers said he could be anything, an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer, and I believed them. There's something sacred about watching your child become someone. Every step felt like a victory. His first award, his first time reading a book aloud in front of the class, his first crush. He told me everything back then. He would sit at the kitchen table, feet dangling, and talk about how he wanted to buy me a big house one day. He said, "You won't have to clean anything ever again, not even your own room." I laughed and kissed the top of his head. I told him, "All I want is for you to be happy. That's enough for me." But the truth is, I did hope, not for a mansion or riches, but for a little recognition, a thank you that came from the heart, a space in his future. I hoped that when he made it, he would look back and remember the woman who never gave up on him. That hope kept me going. It kept me from falling apart during those years when I worked 2 jobs and slept in buses between shifts. It kept me upright when my hands bled from cleaning chemicals and sewing needles. It helped me bite my tongue when people looked down on me for my accent, my worn clothes, my silence. Because I wasn't just doing it for me. I was building a ladder out of poverty, one rung at a time, for my son to climb. He never knew about the nights I cried in silence, about the times I sat on the bathroom floor with a towel over my mouth so he wouldn't hear me sob, about the days I went without lunch so he could have enough for the school field trip. I didn't tell him because I didn't want him to feel guilty. I wanted him to feel free. And maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I should have let him see the cost. Maybe I should have shown him the toll it took. But I didn't. I wore my pain like armor, and I smiled through every ache, because I thought that was what good mothers did. I look back now and wonder if I gave him so much that he forgot how to give back. If in shielding him from struggle, I made him believe that life always came with a safety net, that there would always be someone to catch him, someone to carry the weight, someone to love him without question. I gave him that love, every day, every year, without limits. But sometimes, the more you give, the easier it becomes for others to forget how much it cost you. Have you ever poured everything into someone's future, only to be left behind in their present? If those words hit close to your chest, I want you to take a moment and comment below. Just write, "I kept nothing for myself." That sentence might feel heavy, but you never know who might read it and finally feel understood. And if you're listening right now with your heart pounding, your eyes welling, please take a second to subscribe, not because I need the numbers, but because maybe this space is the first one where you don't feel invisible. Here, we remember the ones who gave everything. Here, your story finds a home. I used to believe that sacrifice always led to gratitude, that love would naturally be returned, that raising someone with kindness meant they would never turn cruel. But life doesn't always reward goodness. Sometimes it punishes it. And that punishment was coming for me in a way I never expected. The first time I met Clara, she smiled too much. Not the kind of smile that reaches your eyes, the kind that feels rehearsed, like she had practiced it in the mirror, knowing it would open doors. And it did. It opened my son's heart like a key. I remember shaking her hand and noticing her nails, perfectly done, red like cherries. Her perfume lingered in the air long after she left the room. Expensive, strong, artificial, just like her presence. She was polite at first, overly polite. She complimented my cooking even when I knew it was oversalted. She laughed at things Mateo said that weren't funny. She asked about my past like she was filling out a survey, not because she actually cared. Something in her voice always felt tight, controlled. I watched her from the kitchen window one afternoon while she stood in the garden pretending to water the plants. She wasn't even pointing the hose at them, just standing there, lost in thought. And when she saw me watching, that smile returned. Too quickly, too wide. Mateo was smitten, completely under her spell. He started dressing differently, talking differently, saying things like, "We've decided," or "Clara thinks," when he used to say, "Mom, what do you think?" That shift came slowly, then all at once. At dinner, he would glance at her before answering me. He started checking his phone during our conversations. Once, I asked him about his work, and Clara answered for him like he couldn't speak for himself anymore. There were little things that started to change. My birthday came and went without a call. She said they were so busy with house stuff, but I knew. I knew she didn't want him too close to me. She started criticizing how I folded the towels, how I seasoned the beans. She offered to teach me better ways. Her tone was always sweet, but her eyes were not. I began to feel like a guest in my own family. Mateo used to ask me to visit every Sunday. Now it was, "Let us check our schedule." The house was filled with scented candles and new furniture. Everything was beige, minimal, cold. No photos of me, not even the one from his graduation that I had framed. It was gone, replaced by abstract art and mirrors that reflected back nothing real. Once, I brought over a blanket I had crocheted for them. It was soft and deep blue, like the ocean at night. I spent weeks on it. Clara accepted it with a smile and said, "How thoughtful. I never saw that blanket again." I later found it folded in a closet, untouched, tags still on a store-bought throw displayed in its place. One evening, I overheard her on the phone. She didn't know I was standing in the hallway. She said, "She clings to him, like she still owns him. It's suffocating." My heart froze. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was just returning from the bathroom. But in that moment, I realized I had become the villain in her version of the story, the overbearing mother, the intruder, the burden. She was planting seeds, slowly, strategically. She knew exactly what she was doing. I began to notice Mateo hesitating when I called. Short answers, vague responses. One time he said, "Clara thinks we need a little more space." I laughed nervously, unsure if he was serious, but he was. The laughter died in my throat. I tried to stay quiet, tried to give them room, but it didn't help. The distance grew. My grandson's first birthday came, and they had a party without inviting me. When I asked why, Mateo said, "We thought it would be too much for you, too loud." He didn't even look me in the eyes. I went home and cried into the same hands that once held him when he was sick. Then came the night I heard her whisper. That night changed everything. I was walking down the hallway to put away the dishes. They didn't hear me coming. Clara leaned into Mateo's ear and said it so softly, so casually. "She's trying to control you. She always has." He didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He just nodded. That moment hit harder than any slap could. It was quiet, but it was a bomb. Everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I had made, was twisted in one sentence. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was the problem. I had become a threat to her narrative. And the worst part? My son believed her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every choice, every word. Was I too present? Too protective? Did I make him feel owned instead of loved? My mind spiraled. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about me being too much. It was about her needing me to be gone. Manipulation is a silent disease. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It doesn't attack. It corrodes. And it always starts with isolation. Have you ever felt like someone rewrote your story without asking for your permission? Like they took your love and turned it into something shameful? If you felt that, please share it in the comments. Just write, "They rewrote who I was." It might feel vulnerable, but there is power in being heard. And if this part of the story is tugging at something inside you, I welcome you to subscribe. Not for numbers or trends, but for a space where truth is honored. Where the people who gave everything are not erased by someone else's narrative. Here, we tell the whole story. When I watched my son's face after that whisper, I realized something heartbreaking. He didn't look confused. He looked relieved, like a weight had been lifted. And that weight was me. It started with a silence. A heavy silence that hung in the air like a storm you can feel in your bones before the clouds even gather. Matteo barely looked at me that morning. He passed me in the hallway without a word. No good morning, Mom, no smile, no eye contact. Just the shuffle of his shoes on the tile and the faint scent of her perfume lingering after he walked by. I knew something was coming. I could feel it. My body felt colder than usual. My hands trembled slightly, even as I held the coffee mug I had used for 10 years. The ceramic one with the little chip on the rim that only I noticed. My hands knew long before my heart did. He waited until dinner. It was quiet, too quiet. The baby was upstairs. Clara was setting the table with a grace that felt rehearsed. She placed the silverware perfectly aligned. No one spoke while we ate. I chewed slowly, trying to swallow the lump in my throat more than the food. My plate stayed full. His eyes stayed low. Hers stayed on me. Then it happened. He cleared his throat. I remember it vividly because it was the only sound in the room that felt real. He said my name. Not Mom, not Mama, just Dolores. My spine straightened. My heart stopped. And then he said it. You need to leave. I blinked. What do you mean? He didn't explain. He didn't soften. You need to move out. It's not working anymore. My mouth opened, but no sound came. I looked at Clara. She didn't even flinch. She took a sip of her wine and looked at a painting on the wall as if she were admiring her own success. I asked why. What had I done? Was I in the way? Was I too loud? Did I say something wrong? Did I offend? He didn't answer. He just repeated the sentence, like it was a script he had memorized. You need to leave. I begged him to look at me, really look at me. But he stared at the table, like I was already gone. I don't understand, I whispered. This is my home, too. I raised you here. I changed your diapers in that very room. I worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over your head. Clara finally spoke. This isn't about the past. It's about boundaries. Boundaries. The words sliced through me. As if my love was now a violation. As if my sacrifices had become offenses. Matteo stood up, walked to the hallway. When he returned, he had my suitcase in his hand, already packed, my clothes, my shoes, my nightgown, folded by someone who wasn't me. That was the moment I knew it had been planned. Not a moment of frustration, not a heat of the moment decision. It was orchestrated, quietly, carefully, coldly. The betrayal wasn't just in his words. It was in the suitcase. It was in how neatly they had prepared for my erasure. I stepped outside. The air hit me like a slap. The sun had set, but the sky still held a faint orange glow, like it couldn't decide whether to fight off the darkness or surrender to it. I stood on the porch staring at the sidewalk, at my life packed in a rectangle of fabric and zippers. My legs wouldn't move. My chest burned. I felt like I was floating outside my own body, watching it all unfold from a distance. A woman in her late 60s thrown out like a broken chair left on the curb for garbage day. My tears didn't fall. They stayed trapped behind my eyes like they too had been told they didn't belong. The neighbors saw. I know they did. Curtains shifted. Lights flickered on. But no one came. No one asked. No one said a word. I sat on the edge of the sidewalk, my hands gripping the handle of my suitcase. I tried to remember the last time he said he loved me, the last time he hugged me, the last time we laughed together. I couldn't. My memory was a fog of chores and obligations and sacrifices. But joy had been missing for a while. I opened my purse, counted my money. It wasn't much. A few crumpled bills and coins. No plan. No place to go. Just me and a night that stretched out like a punishment. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Matteo. Just 2 words. Take care. No explanation. No apology. Just closure in the most brutal form. I wanted to scream. To demand answers. To ask how a child could turn so cold. But I didn't. I just stared at the screen until it turned black again. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from being discarded by someone you gave life to. It's not just sadness, it's annihilation. It's the unraveling of your identity. When your own child erases you, you start to question if you ever existed at all. I called a friend I hadn't spoken to in years. She lived across town. She let me sleep on her couch that night. No questions. Just a blanket and a soft light left on in the hallway. I laid there staring at the ceiling, thinking about how quickly a life can be undone. Not by a fire, not by a flood, but by a sentence whispered in the wrong ear. I want to ask you something from deep inside this wound. Have you ever been pushed aside by someone you gave everything to? Have you ever watched someone you love turn their back on you without even blinking? If you have, I want you to write, "I know what it feels like to disappear." Your words matter more than you think. They might be the light someone else needs tonight. And if this story echoes something inside your soul, I invite you to subscribe. Not out of pity, not out of curiosity, but because here we speak the truth. Here we honor the ones who loved deeply and lost silently. Here you are not alone. That night, as I lay on the couch in a stranger's apartment who once was a friend, I realized something I had never allowed myself to feel before. I was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. A soul tired. A bone-deep exhaustion that comes from being used up and cast aside. The morning after being thrown out was quiet in a way that made everything feel unreal. The world didn't stop like I thought it would. Cars still passed. The bakery down the street still opened. Children still laughed on their way to school. And yet I felt like I had vanished. Like I had been erased, not just from a house, but from the rhythm of life itself. I woke up on that couch, my back stiff, my mouth dry. The blanket my friend gave me was warm but unfamiliar. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and yesterday's coffee. I sat up slowly and tried to gather my thoughts, but they were scattered across too many years and too many memories. My suitcase was still by the door, unopened. I had nothing with me but what they decided I was allowed to keep. I spent the day walking, nowhere in particular, just moving, because sitting still made me feel like I might disappear entirely. I passed the grocery store where I used to take Mateo for Saturday shopping. I saw the little bench outside where we would sit and eat tamales I bought from the lady with the cooler. Everything around me held pieces of a life that no longer belonged to me. I checked my phone more times than I care to admit, hoping for a message, an apology, a question, anything. But it stayed silent. He didn't check if I had somewhere to go. He didn't ask if I needed money. He didn't even pretend to care. That silence screamed louder than any argument ever could. By the end of the day, I went to a church. Not because I'm deeply religious, but because I needed to sit somewhere where people are quiet, where no one would ask questions. I lit a candle for myself. I didn't even know what to pray for. Strength, answers, revenge. I just stared at the flame and whispered, "Why?" over and over again, like it might eventually turn into something useful. That night, I went back to my friend's apartment. I offered to cook dinner as a way to say thank you. She had no idea what to say to me. She kept glancing at me like I was made of glass. I didn't want pity. I wanted space. But space had become the cruelest thing in my life. It was what I had been given in place of love. A few days later, I got a letter, an official one, from Immigration Services. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I opened it slowly, hands trembling. The words didn't make sense at first. My eyes scanned the paper again and again. It was a notice. Someone had submitted information about my immigration status, an anonymous tip, stating I had overstayed my visa, that I was a burden, a risk. They were beginning an investigation. I nearly dropped the letter. There was no question in my heart where it came from. Clara worked in real estate. She had access to property documents, records, systems. Mateo knew my history. He knew how carefully I had lived all these years. I had applied for renewal, had all my paperwork in process. Everything was legal. Delayed, but legal. But someone had used my past as a weapon. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't enough to throw me out. They wanted me gone for good. I felt my breath leave my body in a rush. I clutched the letter like it might burn through my skin. 100 thoughts raced through my head. What if I was detained? What if they came to my friend's house? What if I couldn't fight it? Would anyone believe me? I sat in the kitchen, the letter spread out before me like a threat written in black ink. The fear was suffocating, not just for myself, but for everything I represented. For every immigrant mother who gave everything to raise a child who later forgot where they came from. For every woman who crossed borders not to steal opportunity, but to build it for someone else. I spent the next hours trying to understand what to do. I called the immigration attorney I had worked with during my renewal process. She picked up after the third ring. When I explained what happened, her voice was calm, but I could hear the tension beneath it. She said, "You may qualify for special protection if you were targeted, especially if you can prove emotional abuse or coercion. It's called the U visa, but we'll need evidence." Evidence. How do you collect proof of betrayal? I began searching through old texts, bank transfers, photos, emails. I wrote down every date I had cleaned their home, every birthday I helped plan, every note Mateo had written me when he was younger. I even found a message from Clara where she had joked, "Don't forget, you're the best unpaid nanny ever." At the time, it made me laugh. Now it made me sick. The lawyer asked me if I had ever been threatened. I remembered one conversation. Clara said, "You should be grateful we let you live here. If things get complicated, we have no choice but to protect ourselves." I hadn't understood what she meant then. Now I did. I collected every scrap of my life like broken glass, trying to build something sharp enough to defend myself. In between, I tried to sleep. But sleep came in broken pieces. I kept dreaming of doors closing, of Mateo standing behind one, turning the lock slowly while I screamed his name. Have you ever felt like your very existence was used against you? Like someone weaponized your past, your vulnerability, just to erase you? If you have, I want you to comment, "They turned my truth into a weapon." Say it out loud if you need to. Your story deserves to breathe. And if your heart is aching with mine, if these words echo a silence you've carried for years, I invite you to subscribe. This space is not just a channel. It's a shelter for the broken, for the betrayed, for the ones who were loyal in a world that punishes loyalty. I once believed that my life's work would protect me, that my love, my honesty, my sacrifice would be my shield. But now I saw the truth. My greatest weakness wasn't my immigration status. I felt the chill before it poured. The cell was too bright, the walls too clean, and the noises in the hall sounded hollow, like echoes in someone else's nightmare. I arrived at the detention center with a plastic bag of the few things I was allowed to bring: a change of clothes, an old photograph of me and Mateo when he was 5, a worn rosary given to me by a friend. They took my jewelry and my phone. I watched them roll my clothes into a gray sack, the zipper making a final sound that seemed too loud in that place. In that moment, I realized I was being boxed in, not just by walls, but by memory, by loss, by every unpaid labor of love I ever poured into my son. Walking into the cell, the door clanged shut behind me, and the key turned. I felt the vibration through the floor. It was the sound of a lock on my future. The room smelled of bleach and regret, sterile and unnatural, like all dignity had been scrubbed off. I sat on the narrow bed and tried to breathe, tried to swallow back the questions. How did this happen? When did home become a place I was barred from? I curled into the corner, folding myself small enough to disappear, but the room didn't allow invisibility. That night I heard the others, fellow immigrants whose words trembled behind bars, laughter that turned into sniffling, mothers missing their sons, sons missing their mothers. A woman across the hall cried until someone told her to stop. Her tears echoed in the tiled corridor and became a reminder that I wasn't alone in this void. There were entire lives behind each door. According to researchers, the trauma of detention doesn't just affect immigrants. It ripples through families, communities, mental health. Imagine +1. I had thought I was prepared for hardship. I wasn't prepared for this. In the morning, the light felt wrong. It came through a narrow window high on the wall, bad daylight, like a cheap promise. I washed in cold water, my shirt still stained from cleaning a house 2 days earlier. I looked at my reflection and hardly recognized myself. The woman there had no smile left, just a set of tired eyes and a name carved in shock. I realized I was living out every corner of someone else's plan, maybe Clara's, maybe Mateo's, and I was trapped in the part where I vanished. I asked for a phone call. They allowed one 14-minute conversation. I dialed Mateo's number. He didn't answer. I left a voice message. My own voice sounded flat. Please call me. And then I hung up. 15 minutes later, the guard tapped the window and pointed to the door. My time ended. I walked back through the corridor, counting tiles, counting seconds until isolation set in again. In the common room, I watched mom figures. Women I never met sharing stories like bundles of grief passing across a table. One told me how her husband had agreed to cooperate with immigration agents, trying to keep their kids from being deported, and found himself in detention too. Another woman held a worn teddy bear, her daughter's first toy. She said the daughter was now in foster care. These stories layered themselves on my heart, a heavy quilt of fear and shared betrayal. When I pressed for my legal file, I discovered something else. Clara, or someone who knew all my details, had submitted an anonymous tip to immigration authorities. They had all my dates, my address, the amounts I sent home, the years I cleaned, the nights I stayed up sewing. Someone converted my life into a dossier. Someone turned my sacrifice into ammunition. I remembered the times I tucked Mateo into bed, whispering that he could be whatever he wanted. I believed him. I trusted him. But here I was, suspended between desks and officers, waiting for my fate like a shipment whose destination changed without notice. Sleep came in fragments. I had nightmares of suitcases rolling downstairs, of doors closing without me, of the scent of Clara's perfume turning into smoke. I woke up gasping, tried to hold on to the photograph of me and Mateo, but it slid off the nightstand and onto the cold concrete floor. I sat there, listening to the shuffle of feet in the hallway, feeling the conveyor of detention grind away seconds. And then one afternoon I heard an announcement. Visiting hours now. Someone led me to a glass booth. On the other side of the glass sat a guard and a small phone. My son had agreed to come. My heart soared and fell at once. The guard armed the speaker and I heard Mom. Just one word. It sounded distant. My throat tightened. Hi, my son, I said. He said hi too. But there was a space between us. It wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence of someone else's siege. He asked if I was okay. I said yes. I lied. He said he had things to do. Then a click. I watched his figure shrink behind a wall of steel, a guard escorting him out. The glass slid shut. I sat back and felt emptier than when I entered. If you're listening and feel the weight of being replaced, of being discarded by someone you poured yourself into, comment below with, I am still here. Let this be a space where your story is held, where your pain is seen. And if you haven't yet subscribed, join us. Not because you follow a channel, but because you belong to a community that remembers your worth when others forget it. Memories have a strange way of arriving when you least expect them. They creep in like mist under a door, soft and silent, wrapping themselves around your heart when you're most fragile. I was lying on the stiff mattress of that detention cell, arms folded across my chest like armor, when I remembered the smell of cinnamon from Mateo's first birthday cake. I had baked it in a tiny kitchen, using borrowed pans and measuring everything by hand because I didn't own a scale. He had worn a little blue crown that kept falling over his eyes. He laughed every time it slipped. I remembered his cheeks smeared with frosting and the way he clapped when everyone sang. That was the first time I believed I had built something good from nothing. But those soft memories were quickly crushed by the weight of reality. I was alone. My wrists ached from stress. My voice felt distant inside me, as though it belonged to someone else. In that silence, I began to go backward, not in time, but in understanding. I needed to know how I had gotten here, not just in paperwork or betrayal, but in the small decisions that slowly unraveled the bond between a mother and her son. I pulled out the only letter Mateo had written me in years. It was creased from being folded and unfolded so many times. It wasn't long, just a birthday card from 4 years ago. Happy birthday, Mom. I owe you everything. Thank you for always being there. No signature, no photo, just those words and a drawing of a sunflower. I stared at that sunflower for hours. I wondered if he chose it because he remembered how much I loved them. I used to plant them in pots outside our apartment, even when we couldn't afford new soil. I'd mix coffee grounds and eggshells into the dirt and hope for something bright to grow in our gray little world. Back then, he would sit next to me with his toy trucks, digging holes beside the roots, laughing as I told him the sunflowers needed stories to grow strong. I made up tales about brave flowers fighting off wind and rain, and Mateo believed every word. Now those stories were just shadows on my heart. I started writing things down in the margins of that birthday card, not to send to him, but to remember. I wrote about the time he got sick with a fever so high I thought I would lose him. We had no car, no health insurance. I carried him 6 blocks to the clinic, barefoot, because I had given him my shoes. I waited outside for 3 hours, holding him like a secret. When the doctor finally saw us, she said, "You got him here just in time." I never told Mateo that. He never knew, because some kinds of love aren't spoken. They're stitched into bone. I wrote about his graduation, how I sold my sewing machine to buy him a proper suit, how I stood in the back row with my chest burning with pride. He had looked for me in the crowd, and when our eyes met, he smiled. That smile stayed with me for years. Now it felt like a ghost. I thought about the time I missed my own mother's funeral because I couldn't afford to leave the country. I stayed here for Mateo. I stayed so he would have a better life. I buried my grief in silence, just like I buried every hunger, every wound, every dream, all for him. People often speak about turning points like they come in explosions or big moments, but they rarely do. Most betrayal is a drip, a slow erosion, 1,000 small choices made by someone you love, until one day they are someone else. Until one day they see you not as the person who raised them, but as a weight they need to shed. There was a volunteer at the detention center, an older woman with gray curls and a soft voice. Her name was Joan. She brought books, not new ones, but used and loved. She handed me a small journal and said, "Write, even if you don't know what to say. Your story deserves to exist outside this place." I began writing that same night. I didn't write for justice. I didn't write to defend myself. I wrote to hold on to my truth, because when the world tries to erase you, your voice becomes your last possession. I filled pages with the kind of love that has no audience, the kind that folds laundry in silence, that wakes up early to cook rice and beans before the sun is up, that learns a new language while scrubbing someone else's floors, that kisses a child's forehead every night, even when you have nothing left to give. I wrote down every time I was called too loud, too emotional, too attached. I wrote down how Clara would glance at me like I was something old Mateo needed to outgrow. I wrote about the fear of being too much and the ache of being not enough. I wrote about my silence, and then I wrote about the day he stopped hugging me. It wasn't a fight. There was no argument, just a shift, a moment where he stepped back instead of leaning in. I had reached for him, and he smiled politely, but didn't close the distance. That was the first goodbye, though I didn't know it then. I wanted to believe that Mateo was still in there, buried beneath the layers of manipulation, pressure, ambition. I wanted to believe that the little boy with frosting on his nose still remembered me, but belief is a fragile thing in the face of evidence. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that even their silence becomes a language you understand? If you have, leave a comment that says, "I hear the silence." Let that be the signal that you're not alone, that others carry that same ache with them too. And if these words feel like pieces of your own story, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe not just to watch, but to be part of a community where your pain is honored and your endurance is seen. Here, the forgotten are remembered. Here, the invisible become visible again. In that cell, with nothing but a paper journal and my memories, I began to reclaim what had been taken from me. I was not a ghost. I was not a burden. I was a mother. I was a survivor. I was a woman who had loved without conditions. And now, finally, I was writing her back into existence. There are certain sounds you never forget. The metallic clink of the detention center door locking behind you. The hum of fluorescent lights that never turn off. The low murmur of voices trying not to cry. But among those noises, there was one that felt like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. The voice of my immigration lawyer when she told me there was still a way out. She visited me during one of the longest weeks of my life. I had nearly lost hope. Days bled into nights. I ate without tasting. I slept without resting. But when I saw her walk in, her presence reminded me that not everyone had turned their back on me. She sat across from me, placed a folder on the metal table, and opened it slowly like she was revealing a secret. "There's something called the U visa," she said gently. "It's for victims of certain crimes, including those betrayed by people close to them, if that betrayal involves coercion, threats, or manipulation. We can apply." My hands trembled as I reached for the folder. Inside were guidelines, requirements, and most importantly, hope. She explained that the U visa was designed for immigrants who suffered abuse but were willing to help law enforcement or government agencies investigate. It wasn't an easy road, but it was a road. And after all the closed doors, after all the betrayals, I needed that road more than I needed air. We began collecting everything. Every text Clara had sent, every voicemail Mateo had left, the receipts from years of support I had provided for their household. My medical bills that showed anxiety, stress, and insomnia, all traced back to the toxic environment I had been forced to live in. I had never thought of those things as evidence. I thought of them as the cost of love. But now, they were proof that I had been used, proof that I had been discarded, proof that I had been silenced. The lawyer asked for witness letters. My old friend, the one who took me in, wrote one. She described how I showed up on her doorstep with a suitcase and swollen eyes. She wrote about how I barely spoke those first few nights, how I walked like I was carrying something too heavy to name. Another came from a woman I had cleaned houses with for over a decade. She had watched me raise Mateo through every lunch break and shared holiday. She knew how proud I was. She knew the ache in my voice when I talked about him. Her letter made me cry. The most unexpected letter came from the pastor of the church I used to visit. He had only seen me a handful of times, but he remembered me. He wrote about the Sunday I brought Mateo as a boy, how I prayed quietly in the back pew and left a small donation from a paycheck that must have been stretched to its last cent. He wrote, "She is not a criminal. She is a cornerstone." The lawyer said we needed something more, something that connected Mateo's betrayal directly to my immigration status. A document, a message, anything that proved they had used the system as a weapon. I remembered the text Clara once sent to Mateo and accidentally copied to me. It read, "If she doesn't back off, we'll have no choice but to report her. She's not legal. Remember?" It had felt like a threat when I first saw it, but I had brushed it off, told myself she was just angry. But now, in the hands of my lawyer, it became the most powerful piece of evidence. We filed the petition. The process would take months, maybe years, but it was submitted. And with that submission, I was granted a temporary protection, no deportation, while my case was under review. When I was told I could leave the detention center, I didn't smile right away. I was still in shock. I walked out carrying the same suitcase, but everything inside me had changed. The woman who walked into that place had been broken, discarded, afraid. The woman walking out was tired, yes, but she was also lit with something that had almost been extinguished. Dignity. The air outside hit me like a wave. It wasn't warm, but it was free. I looked up and saw the sky for the first time in what felt like years. Real sky. No bars, no limits. Just open possibility. I found a room to rent from an older couple who knew what it meant to start over. They gave me a bed, a key, and most importantly, silence when I needed it. I began sewing again. Not for money at first, but just to feel like myself again. Stitch by stitch, I rebuilt pieces of my identity. There is something sacred in creation. Whether it's sewing, cooking, writing, or simply surviving, when you create something with your hands, you remember that you still have power, that you are more than what was done to you. I started volunteering at a center that helped immigrant women find work. I didn't speak much. I mostly helped clean or cook. But one afternoon, a young girl sat next to me. She looked tired. Her accent reminded me of my own when I first arrived. She whispered, "My mother is still in detention. They won't let her out." I reached into my bag and handed her a small sunflower I had stitched from leftover yellow fabric. I told her, "Keep this until she comes home." That was the first time I smiled in weeks. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from ash, if you've ever held on to one thread of hope while the world tried to unravel you, I want you to comment, "I am stitching my strength." Your voice matters here, not just to be heard, but to be remembered. And if this story mirrors your own heartbreak, or someone you love has faced what I faced, subscribe to this space. Not out of habit, but out of shared strength. Here, we protect each other. Here we gather every piece that was broken, and we make something whole. Because when someone tries to erase you, the greatest rebellion is to keep writing your name. Stitch it into everything you do. Say it out loud in every breath, and never, ever let it be forgotten. Healing does not arrive like a parade. It does not knock loudly or announce itself with fanfare. It creeps in during the quiet moments when you are folding laundry and realize your hands have stopped trembling. It hums low in the background while you cook a meal for yourself and eat it without feeling ashamed of your hunger. Healing came to me like that, slowly and without permission. It did not fix everything, but it helped me live through what remained. Every morning, I started with a ritual. I lit a candle beside the window, wrote down one sentence in my journal, and took 3 deep breaths before I touched my phone or spoke to anyone. That tiny act became my anchor. It reminded me that no matter what had been taken from me, I still had choice. I could still choose to meet the day with softness. I began attending group meetings at the local community center. Women like me, immigrants, mothers, workers, survivors. We shared stories in broken English and perfect pain. One woman told us about how her daughter married into wealth and erased her roots. Another said her son changed his name because it sounded too foreign for his job. And we all nodded. Because we knew. The loss of a child is not always death. Sometimes it is detachment, disconnection, a slow fade until they no longer speak your language, literally and emotionally. I started helping one of the women learn to read. She was in her 60s and had spent her life cleaning houses. She had never held a book without shame. We started with small words: cat, sun, love. Her eyes would light up each time she recognized one. And one day, as we finished a lesson, she touched my arm and said in Spanish, "You give back what the world stole." That stayed with me, because it was not about charity, it was about reclamation. During one of those group sessions, I was asked to speak at a local event, Voices of the Forgotten. I almost declined. My voice still felt too fragile. But something inside me whispered that this was my moment to shift the story, not to erase the pain, but to honor it. I wrote a speech in my own words. I stood in front of a crowd that looked nothing like the home I had once been pushed out of, and I told them the truth. I told them about the whisper that changed everything, about the betrayal that cut deeper than any wound, about the silence that followed, louder than any scream. I told them that my son, the boy I had protected with my last ounce of strength, had turned me in, and I saw their eyes soften, not with pity, but with understanding. Because many of them had lost people too, not to death, but to shame, to greed, to the illusion of power. After I finished speaking, a young woman approached me. She said, "I haven't spoken to my mother in 5 years. I believed things about her that now I'm not sure are true. Thank you." She held my hand for a long time, and in that moment, I felt the ripple of restoration. Not for me, for all of us. I received a letter 2 weeks later, from Mateo. His handwriting had changed. It was neater, sharper, the kind of writing that comes from trying too hard to be in control. It started with the usual, "I hope you're well. I heard you were released." And then came the real sentence. "I'm sorry for how things happened. I was confused. Clara said things that made me doubt everything. I know that's not an excuse, but I need you to know I never stopped loving you." I read that sentence more times than I care to admit. I didn't know whether to believe it. Love should not come with conditions. And yet, there it was, his attempt to reach across the distance he created. I folded the letter and placed it inside my journal, right next to the birthday card and the drawing of the sunflower. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't love him, but because some letters deserve to sit in silence for a while, to breathe, to be felt, to ask for permission before becoming dialogue again. Healing isn't a straight path. Some days I still flinch when I hear footsteps behind me. Some nights I still dream of being locked in, of Mateo's voice calling me Dolores instead of Mom. But then I wake up, light my candle, and remind myself I am no longer inside that room. I have returned to myself. I no longer count my worth in how much I am needed. I no longer measure my value by how much I can endure. I am more than what I survived. I am more than what I gave away. Now, when I see sunflowers, I do not think of loss. I think of resilience. I think of the way they turn toward the sun, even when it feels far. I think of roots that grow in silence, beneath the surface, preparing to bloom. If you are still holding on to a wound that has no name, if you are healing in secret because the world tells you your pain is inconvenient, I want you to write in the comments, I am healing on my own terms. Let those words be a declaration. Let them remind someone else that they too have a right to heal at their own pace. And if this story has found a home in your heart, subscribe to this channel. Not for me, but for you. For every story that hasn't been told yet. For every voice that was buried and is now ready to rise. Because here, your healing is not a whisper, it is a vow. There is a kind of peace that only comes after a storm you thought would never end. It is not loud. It does not arrive with fireworks or applause. It's quiet. It feels like breathing fully for the first time in years. It's walking down a familiar street and not flinching at every memory. It's waking up and realizing you are no longer surviving. You are living. That peace found me slowly and in pieces. In the way I arranged my new room to feel like a home. In the meals I cooked just for myself, carefully, like I mattered. In the plants I began to grow again, especially the sunflowers, tall and stubborn, reaching always for the light. One afternoon, while sweeping the kitchen floor, I realized I hadn't cried in 3 days. That may not sound like much to most people, but for me, it was everything. It meant the grief was no longer running the show. It meant I could see my reflection in the mirror and no longer think only of what was taken. I could think of what remained. My papers are still pending. There are still hearings ahead. There is still the weight of bureaucracy and uncertainty. But now, I face it differently. With a spine that has remembered how to stand. With a heart that still beats despite the silence. And with a voice that no longer asks for permission to exist. As for Mateo, he wrote again. This time the letter was longer. He spoke of regret, of therapy, of how Clara had left him 6 months after my removal, and how he had spiraled into guilt he did not know how to name. He said he had gone through my journals, the ones I left behind without realizing, and finally saw my story in full, not as the version told to him, but as the truth. He asked if we could talk, just talk. I have not answered yet, because this is my time now. My silence is not a punishment. It's a boundary. It's a moment to honor myself. Maybe one day I will sit across from him again. Maybe not. But I know now that whether or not he understands me fully, I am no longer waiting for his validation to define who I am. To every person who has walked this path with me through these words, thank you. Thank you for listening without judgment, for feeling without turning away, for holding space for pain that too many people pretend does not exist. If my story has touched something inside you, if it has made you remember your own strength, your own heartbreak, your own journey, know this. You are not alone. Not now. Not ever. You are seen, you are heard, you are held. Please, take a moment to share your story in the comments if you feel safe to do so. Just a sentence, just a word. Sometimes that's all it takes to make someone else feel less invisible. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I invite you with all my heart to do so now. This is more than a channel. It is a sanctuary for stories like ours, for voices that have been too long in the dark. Here you will find truth. You will find healing. You will find your people. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for staying, for witnessing, for believing in the power of a life rebuilt. Click on the next video that's about to appear. I'll be waiting for you there with another story that reminds us. We survive not by forgetting what hurt us, but by choosing to live anyway. Until then, breathe deep. And remember, you are still here, and that is everything.